Now, the retail clothing sector says the repair and the reopening of vandalized malls is likely to take between a few months to 2 years. National Clothing Retail Federation Executive Director Michael Lawrence says the targeting of distribution centres and the trucking industry in KZN will impact all communities, particularly the poorest. Michael joins us now via our video link for more on this story. And Michael, that sounds like an incredibly long time. And, you know, the people listening to this, particularly those who are employed in the retail sector, will be wondering what's going to happen with their jobs if it's going to take, indeed, as you say, worst case scenario, at least a couple of years.
Well, our colleagues, good morning, Michelle, our colleagues in the property sector, and we basically rent property from them, are telling us, I mean, there's going to be an enormous time lag now in terms of getting those shops and malls sorted out again, and then we've got to get them fitted. And our big concern is a lot more immediate than 6 months and 2 years. Our big concern is, even as we described last year when we were dealing with COVID issues, this is winter, it's cold. Poor and low-income communities do not have winter wardrobes available. Infants, children grow. We have enormous problems, and while there's a very real problem with food security, which you have been discussing and which we understand government is addressing quite aggressively now, there are equally problems around the availability of clothing and textile products to households. These are enormous challenges, and our staff are on standby to have a turnaround as quickly as possible for all of the clothing retailers. But let's not underestimate the extent of the problem, the cost of the problem, and the challenges to ordinary people who are not middle class and don't have the kind of fallbacks that a few of us have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of the cost to retailers from those malls that have been destroyed, obviously they would have been insured, but talk to us about that issue.
So look, there are some costs that are recoverable from an insurance point of view, but there's the cost of doing business, there's the cost of security of business. There have been enormous challenges to trade, certainly over the last 4 to 5 years, and exacerbated over the last 18 months or so by the pandemic, and now just taken to a whole new tsunami level by what has been happening. We have, as you described in your opening remarks, enormous challenges around our distribution centres, enormous concerns still in terms of security around those. And so the costs are nevertheless, we will recover some insurable costs, but they are going to be costs that run quite literally into the hundreds of millions and very likely into the billions just for our sector alone. And our biggest single challenge in this value chain is we were putting an immense amount of effort into redeveloping the local manufacturing sector. Many of those factories have just gone up in flames. Many of those factory owners have already communicated to us that they're not going to see any opportunity for recovery. It's enormously sad. The impact on our economy, on jobs, on livelihoods is yet to be counted in some kind of useful way. And we just, at the moment, trying to get our heads around the scale of the problem. And of course, as people who look for solutions, we will find solutions, but it'll all come at a cost.
Yeah. I mean, is there an appetite, is there even a discussion to be had here about some retailers not having the appetite to rebuild?
No, absolutely not. So look, the Clothing Retail Federation deals with the larger retailers. We will be rebuilding. We will be working with our local manufacturing sector. We will be working with the local logistics community. The reality is we do what we do in part. It's about the economics and being responsible to our shareholders. But we do what we do because we recognize we perform a very important service to communities across the length and breadth of Southern Africa. And so we will be there. I already have meetings scheduled with trade unions, even in the manufacturing sector later this week. We're going to start looking at what the rebuild options are. There's no question about it.
Okay.
We're certainly not going to give up about this.
Yeah.
But it's coming at a price.
I mean, the Durban port is a centre of particular concern, given that it handles 70% of all imports into South Africa. What are the kinds of discussions that are now taking place behind the scenes in terms of perhaps setting up armed convoys to ensure that the materials that are needed get to where they're needed and get there safely?
Yeah. So as of, we have been advised by the National Security Services Joint Operating Center that the armed convoys are going to start very, very soon, probably today even. Obviously, they have to prioritize things like food. Certain chemical products are very necessary for processing. Fuel, you've discussed fuel challenges earlier. We've got to be sensible here and kind of stand in line. But as I've said, textile-based products have their own form of essential to many, many, many households. So we are going to see security services in convoy style, but we also need to get to a point where basically the logistic routes are safe and secure in their own right, without the need to actually have rolling security with each and every truck.
Yeah. Michael, I just want to squeeze in one last question as we wrap up our interview, and it's a question that's come through to us on our social media pages. The issue of people who have been in the employ of those retailers that have had their stores destroyed. What is the future, the next weeks and months? What does it look like for those employees in terms of the chances of their salaries still continuing to be paid?
So I run an association. I don't run the actual retailers themselves, but I can take comfort from the fact that my membership treated COVID as a time to do the best they possibly could for all of their employees and for those who are employed in their supply chain and the related support services. We will do absolutely everything we can to create the highest form of job security. But there are going to be pragmatic challenges. People with shorter term contracts, obviously, those will be at risk. We won't be employing new staff in quite the manner in which we had wanted to do into the next few months, 18 months, 24 months or so. So the impact is not necessarily, although I can't speak with absolute certainty, but it should not be necessarily for those currently employed. The problem is we live in a country with huge unemployment challenges, and we had hoped to be part of trying to just push back on some of those unemployment challenges with younger people into the future, especially. That's going to be very difficult for us in the next 18 to 24 months.
Michael Lawrence, we appreciate your time this morning on the AM Report. Thanks so much for giving us an update on that important aspect of this ongoing story. He's the Executive Director of the National Clothing Retail Federation. Some important points coming out of that interview.